I'm doing my mid-month wrap-up. So the first book I had gotten done in January. This was a collaboration with Melanie Moreland and Scarlett Scott. So this is Made for the Marquess. So we got the characters of Alexander, he's the Marquess Wheaton, and Miss Maddie, I want to say Smythe, because it's S-M-Y-T-H-E, so I'm going to say Smythe. I'd say slight class difference in here for their positions, like right at the beginning, you know. So the content warning is there's talk of physical violence and emotional trauma. So I did enjoy reading this book, but the reason for my star rating, because I ended up giving this 3 stars, was the fact that I felt like the romance was too easy. The hero wins the heroine in a card game. The man who gambled her away was her father, and because he is a cheater when it comes to card games, he didn't expect to lose. Of course, if he admitted to cheating at cards, other people would have found out and it would have been bad for him socially. So he had to allow the Marquess to take Maddie. After that, it was pretty smooth sailing for the heroine, for the fact that the Marquess was a very nice man who didn't want to hurt her or use her in any way sexually. After knowing her for a few days in his carriage, he decides to marry her since he needed a wife to start a family with. You know, like he was like, oh, you know, kind of like kill 2 birds with 1 stone kind of thing, you know? I felt like if the heroine truly was abused by her father, he would scold her and smack her hands with a tool for punishment. I feel like with her years of abuse and definitely having a form of PTSD, I would have liked seeing the Marquess courting her either before marrying her or courting her after marrying. Either way, I felt like this book was lacking any build-up within the relationship and more yearning. They got together way too quickly for my taste. Then all throughout the book, he was constantly doting on her with jewelry, clothing, them having a good amount of great sex. And then shortly after they have sex, she discovers she was pregnant. I said the only conflict was her father arriving at the Marquess's estate, and the father obviously wanting money, and that got resolved rather quickly. The Marquess was a very good and fair man, and he was liked by his staff and the people who lived in the village. He was liked by a lot of people. He was a very fair man, very good man. So to me, I was like, well, this is real easy. It's like this guy only knows her for like a few days, and he's like, oh, I guess I'll marry her. She seems nice, you know, she seems like a very nice lady. And then he finds out like more of the truth of really who she is. You end up finding out in the book that she is actually, I guess you'd say maybe a lady. She definitely wasn't born poor. So you end up finding out that her mother was already pregnant when she married, like, I think he was an earl or something like that, when she married the earl. So on one hand, I can understand his reasonings of being mad. Like after his wife dies, he finds her journals and he's upset that he finds out that the daughter that he raised is not his own. So I can understand him being mad, but I didn't think he was right for him to take it out on the girl because it wasn't her fault, you know? So what ended up happening is her mother was engaged to another man, and he ended up getting killed by a pickpocket. He got shot in the streets, and they obviously had sex before marriage, and she was pregnant at the time. So she was like, you know, didn't want to be destitute. Like, you know, it's very hard for women back in that day of, you know, being unwed mothers and things like that. Unless like you were already married when the child was conceived, it's a little bit different. But if you were unmarried and you had a child, you were looked down upon, you know? So, this man comes along, this Earl, and he's, you know, obviously smitten with her. So she was like, oh, well, he seems like a nice enough man, I'll marry him, you know? And since she was like, you know, how many months along, she made it look like, you know, that the baby came early, you know? And so like, I you know, obviously, if it was something like in today's time and the woman lies, I think it's wrong. because of the fact that there are how many things out there for women to help women who are single, things like that, you know. There are certain benefits for women. So I just don't like that today. And also, like, even if, say, the baby daddy wants nothing to do with the child, you could still file for child support, you know? Because with the father, he'd have to sign his rights away, like, really early, you know? And the only time you're not getting any child support from the baby daddy is if he was a total lame ass and he doesn't have a job and he kind of like goes from job to job. And then by the time, you know, child support ends up getting set up for that job, he could end up quitting and go to another job. There are dudes who do that out there who are just lame asses. Also, there's some guys who work under the table that got paid by, you know, with cash. And so you can't like track that, you know, through his like social security and all that stuff. So I could see men getting away with that type of thing. But usually men have to pay child support, you know, even if they don't want anything to do with the kid, they gotta pay child support. Where back in the day, it was women didn't have the rights that we do now. So I could see her reasoning of why she lied to the Earl, you know. I don't condone it. I don't think it's right, but I understand, you know. So that's basically what it was with her. Is like she ended up finding out that that man was not her father. And so it kind of made it easier for her to like hate him, you know, because he used to like smack her hands and he left like scars on her hands, to where she would wear gloves all the time. But like I said, I felt like it was a very easy romance. Like if you're looking for something like fairly easy, not a lot of complications, this would be a good book for you to read. Like I said, I didn't really feel like there was much build up, you know, with like, she married him because it was like, oh, well, he's going to take care of me. He's a very nice man. He's got money, you know. She won't have to be a servant anymore, you know. I mean, heck, you know, I would do the same thing. And then, you know, he was very, like I said, he treated her nicely. When they did have sex, he was gentle with her and taught her pleasure and all that stuff. So it really wasn't a hardship for her, you know, it really wasn't. And then he's buying her stuff, buying her clothes, buying her jewelry, like doting on her, things that she never like had gotten. Like she had gotten that when she was younger with her mother. So, and then when her mother died, her, you know, her father just kind of like lost his shit and stuff. So it kind of was like, you felt a little bit better knowing, okay, this man is not her father. But yeah, it was okay. I really wanted it to be better. So next book, this one here, I really tried to get through this one, but I was having such a hard time with it. This is B.K. Borison. This is Good Spirits. I'd say if I listened to this on audio, I probably would have gotten through it and might have given it like 4 stars. So I had said I stopped reading this book on page 222 and decided to skim the rest of it on January 4th. There was almost a whole month of trying to slowly get through this book. I said, I don't want to say I hate this book because honestly, that's not what I'm feeling. I do feel like some books are meant to be read through audiobook and enjoyed that way better. I do enjoy the story, but the writing is so slow paced that it made my eyes heavy reading it. And how many times I wanted to fall asleep reading this book. I love the concept of this story, but I think this would be better if it was adapted as a movie from Passionflix. I think they would do a good job of telling the story without leaving in all of the boring pacing. The pacing was just really slow and boring for me, that I had a hard time with it, you know. I love seeing Nolan and Harriet getting to know each other, and the more they discover about each other, the more they fall in love. I also loved how the more Nolan was around Harriet, you could see that he was starting to get memories of his past back, but also he was feeling alive and not dead since he's a ghost. This is basically like a Scrooge retelling, except she's not really a Scrooge. And he's more of kind of the grumpy, you know, of the character. And so he's like the ghost of Christmas past. And so he visits her and then he goes and takes her and shows her like her past memories and things like that. And being able to taste certain foods again. It's almost like he was coming back to life. I said it reminded me a bit of the movie Warm Bodies, where a young zombie guy falls for a woman who isn't a zombie, and the more time he spends with the alive girl, the more she brings him back to life. It's a similar concept to the story. As I think if this book had faster pacing, and I finished this without skimming, I would have given it 4 stars. Cute story, and I like them as characters. I could sympathize with Harriet's life. She dealt with like a lot of stuff with her mother. Her mother was very controlling and precise and wanted things like a certain way. And Harriet was more of like, kind of like fly off the seat of her pants. She liked antiques like her aunt and owned this antique shop that used to be her aunt's and things like that. Or she opened the antique shop because her aunt wanted her. I can't remember that part of the book. But like I said, it was the pacing that really kind of I struggled with. But I thought the story was fine. I liked the characters. I thought Harriet was a little bit too much of a doormat for her mother. And I was kind of glad that she started to kind of like, I don't know, get her like confidence back and things like that. He kind of brought out her confidence. And like I said, the more time he spent around her, the more he like started to feel these feelings. Because he's dead, so he's like, everything is kind of like numb to him. But he started to like taste things again. Like I said, almost like he was coming back to life. And then the ending, because I skimmed the rest of it, I don't know how it ended, you know, where it was like, is he still a ghost or is he alive? I didn't understand that at the end. It was kind of like almost open-ended, or maybe you have to you like form your own interpretation of it, you know. It was okay though. But like I said, I couldn't get through it. I didn't want to say I read it when I didn't finish it, you know. I don't think it's right to go and, you know, even though I was like halfway through it, I don't think it's right to say you finished the book when you didn't. So that's why I just put it as DNF. I liked certain parts of it I thought were really nice. But like I said, it was the pacing that really did me in, you know. So the next book, this one here was another DNF. I had a whole stretch of DNFs. Yeah. So this is The High Priestess by Michelle Hurd. This is The Mafia Empire. I think this is book 2. I think it's book 2. So we got the characters of Lincoln Knight. He's 37. He's American. And then Cassia Dimitru. She's 28 and she's Greek. So it's a mafia book, of course. Content warning is graphic violence, gruesome attacks, mention of sex slavery, and part description of sexual assault, loss of family, panic attacks, PTSD, self-harm, and thoughts of self-deletion. So DNF this book around 40%. I found it absolutely ridiculous that her whole family dies, especially her one sister that seemed fine. Then days later, she just suddenly dies in the hospital. Meanwhile, the heroine got shot 3 times but survives. That was very convenient. I said, then the hero needs constant help, or the heroine needs constant help from Knight because she doesn't know a thing about running an organization. Also, barely knew how to shoot a gun. It was just hard for me to believe that she can run an illegal organization. Like, her father was running it. And her father was definitely like a certified psycho. That dude was unhinged. So the syndicate that was the Russian syndicate, they had come in to their house and like shot her father, obviously killed her mother. Her sister, her younger sister, who was 19, and then she had her other sister and her, were all basically running out of the house, you know, to get away. And the younger sister ended up getting shot in the back of the head. And so they keep running. And then, like I said, she ended up getting shot like 3 times, once in the back, and then I think like with the shoulder and possibly the leg, I think. And then Knight sees all this, and he was, you know, like shooting some of the people to kind of like take them down. Because he was like a bodyguard, or he was working with like the mafia people. And he used to be like former military, so he knew how to like shoot and different things like that. She barely knew how to shoot a gun. She didn't know how to run an organization. And I'm like, girl, you think all of a sudden you're just gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna take over? She like just seemed like such a damsel in distress that I was like, I just wanted her to be like more mentally stronger. You know, it was something like, okay, she doesn't know how to shoot a gun. All right, maybe Knight can teach her how to shoot, you know, how to properly shoot and everything like that. But it just felt like he should have been the one like taking over the Greek syndicate, since the fact that she didn't know what the heck she was doing. And like I said, I got about 40% in, and I'm just like, this is so ridiculous. It was hard for me to like suspend reality, you know? So I ended up was like, nah, I'm not into this. I will delve into the other books in the series to see if like maybe like the third book is better, and go from there. But yeah, it didn't work for me, unfortunately. So the next book, this is another DNF. I was not feeling the writing. So this is While You Were Sailing by Christy Caldwell. Now this is basically like a retelling of While You Were Sleeping. And like I said, I didn't get much into the book. It just, I wasn't feeling it. There was like these girls that were like singing this carol, and the one hero was kind of sitting there kind of like all like grumpy kind of thing. And I was kind of like, I don't know, I'm just not really feeling the writing of this. So I ended up like DNFing. I don't know if maybe I'll go back, try it again another time. But I like the whole concept of like, that it was like a While You Were Sleeping retelling, because I love that movie. I love that movie. But yeah, this one here, it just was like, I couldn't get into it, unfortunately. The next one was another DNF. This one here was Duke of Wrath by Mariah Stone. It was kind of like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Again, another one where I couldn't get into it. It sounded really depressing to me. As I was kind of like getting into it, I think I was like a few pages in, and I was like, I'm not really feeling this. I don't know what it is about this one, but I'm just not feeling it. And it just sounds kind of depressing, where he's like a scarred hero. And I read recently another scarred hero, and so I was like, I don't know, I'm not really feeling this. Maybe I'll go back to it another time, or maybe I'll try another like Mariah Stone book. But I just was like, I was not feeling it, unfortunately. I don't know why. I was just like, nope. So then I decided to try to delve into this one here. So this is the Make Me Yours by Jennifer Sukovic. Is a Chicago Railers hockey. Now this is like a friends to lovers, and I am not a huge fan of that trope. Because I'm always like, so this guy's hot, he's attracted to her, how come you guys never banged? So you've been friends this whole time and you've never gotten together? Never? It's just kind of hard for me to believe. So he's a hockey player. So I had said, I'm so tired of the heroines explaining how they aren't happy with their job. Obviously not her current relationship either. And then she catches the douchebag screwing another chick at work. Also, why has she been friends with a hot hockey player for years and never jumped his bones, and he's obsessed with her? Come on now. So it was kind of really far-fetched for me as I was going along with it, because she's like, oh, well, she's telling her friend like, oh, I'm not, the relationship's not going great, and then she's not really super happy with her job, and then she decides to go to the job because she has to turn in this paperwork. And so she goes to, her boyfriend's office, and there he is railing some chick from behind, and ends up finding out the dude's been having an affair with this chick for like 4 months, and the bitch is pregnant. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? What the hell? And then now she's going to be like, woe is me to her friend, and it sounded like, it's going to be like a friends with benefits type of thing. And I'm just like, ugh. So yeah, I was like, no, I'm not feeling this at all. Maybe I'll try another book from that author, but I was just like, no. I think this is like one of those ones where more of like the 20-year-olds are going to be into like this one here, and it just seems like I'm like, oh, I think I'm too old for this. I think I'm too old for this book. And I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna like it. So the next book I ended up reading, this was another Claire Kent book, I love Claire Kent. If you know, you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I love her. I read a lot of her books. So this is the second book in that fairy tale series that she's been doing. This one here is like a Cinderella retelling. So this one's Ashes by Claire Kent. I ended up buying this from her website, and it's about the size of like a mass market paperback. It's so cute. It's so tiny, but it has in it a couple of like what I would consider like step backs. So we got this here where they're like in the kitchen, and I thought that was cute. So she had signed it. And then the back, obviously they're in the bedroom. And so I was like, I thought it was cute, so I wanted to get it. So yeah, this one is sweet. It says, life is now a gritty fairy tale without a happily ever after. So this one has it to where her name is Teresa, his name is Mason. So it's a post-apocalyptic. They're both virgins. And I love that trope with either the male's a virgin or they're both virgins, because then they can discover like what they like together. I like that. You know, I like those. So the content warning is mistreatment of heroine by stepfamily, attempted robbery, uneven power structure in that society. So this is 39 years after the fall/impact. If you've read the Kindle series, you know that an asteroid came to Earth and kind of like did a lot of damage. And so it's been like how many years since they're trying to like get structures going again and societies going and towns and things like that, you know, getting things going. And so they live near, they're like this in this town that's near what they call the central cities. Now the central cities is, their like hierarchy there is different than like in the Kindle series. In the Kindle series, it's a little bit different. They do more like trading and things like that. I prefer that myself. So Teresa is someone who is working as a domestic for her stepmother Lorraine and stepsister Aria, but she is treated as more of a servant by them. Teresa's mother left years ago and she hasn't seen her since. Her father passed away and her sister Annabelle is married and living inside of the central cities. It's a city that is walled up and guarded. Meanwhile, the town outside of the central city is still being controlled by the people in power. I said, I would say that this society is what I would call either it's more of a dictatorship or what they call, it's called a totalitarianism, where it says it's a form of government that is theoretically permits no individual freedom, that seeks to subordinate all aspects of individual life to the authority of the state. So the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini coined the term totalitarian, totalitarian, whatever, in the early 1920s to categorize the new fascist state of Italy, which he further described as all within the state, none outside the state, none against the state. By the beginning of World War II, totalitarian had become synonymous with absolute and oppressive single-party government. Other modern examples of totalitarian states include the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler, the People's Republic of China, things like that. So you're talking like more of a repressive type of structure that I explain it a little bit more in here, where so where the people in power have more privileges and control, and the people below them are more workers that aren't able to save money because they live on a credit system that disincentivizes civilians from earning more, being able to achieve more of what they're worth, because you had to spend what you earn in that month. So if you say you get 500 credits, you have to spend those 500 credits, otherwise you lose them the next month. There's no buildup. You can't like roll it over, you know? So I'm like, well, that's fucking bullshit. So that means like you can't really save anything, you know? Like you can't save enough to where you'd say, hey, I have enough credits to where I can go somewhere else. Don't work like that. Not in that area. So that's why I said like there's no way I would live in that area, because they oppress like their citizens so much. You know, this is why I'm like, you had societies like in Europe, like you had like the kingdoms and things like that, where obviously people will always say like Queen was it Queen Antoinette? Queen Antoinette had said like let them eat cake, which essentially isn't the right line. She didn't I don't think she said that. I think she said let them have flour or something like that to make cake or whatever it is. But yeah, it showed the privilege of the haves versus the have-nots. So that's kind of like what it is with this system here, where they're all pretty much struggling to survive. Meanwhile, the people in the central cities have more power and privilege than the people below, you know? So, I said also the society there works more on bribes if you don't have the proper paperwork. So if you want to get in and out of the area, you have to have something of value to give to them, and it's not as safe as the people in power claim it is. Like they try to act like, you know, the area is safe, but it's really not, because you're still dealing with like people who don't want to either be a part of that society or they want to take advantage of the people in that society, you know? Like you have these guards that would be like, you know, you have to have your papers, which kind of reminds me of like Nazi Germany. You have to have your papers, you know? And so you have to have your papers in order to transfer out of there and go into the central cities. If you don't have the proper paperwork, you can't leave, you know? And so she had to basically bribe them with jewelry. She ended up finding jewelry, different things like that. She would go and scavenge all the time. So she had essentially bribed them in order for her to get over to the central cities. So Teresa is in a no-win situation, is trying to make the best of it. Mason is a man she knows in town who works his family farm. He used to live in the central cities, and once his parents passed away, he moved back to the town and makes and sells cheese and milk every month when he goes to the market. Teresa assumes that Aria and Mason will get married based on what Lorraine and Aria tell Teresa. They like kind of like throw it in her face like, oh, Mason's going to marry her, you know? When one day while she's traveling to the central city, she runs across Mason, who is heading there himself, and she goes there to see if she can stay with her sister rather than to continue to live with Lorraine and Aria and their mistreatment of her. Like, and Mason even told her, he's like, why do you continue to stay with them? They're not good for you. You know, you'd be better like to move on with something else, you know? So he even like tells her like, you deserve more than that, you know? So while Mason's talking with her, he kind of like shyly asks her and says like, hey, you know, if things don't work out with your sister, would you be willing to marry me? He's like, I need help on my farm and we could be helpmates and, you know, kind of go from there. And so she's like, okay, well, you know, if things don't work out, I'll think about it. So of course things didn't work out with her sister. And then she comes back and tells him like, you know, she was still in the central city and he was still there selling his wares and stuff like that. So she had basically told him like, I'll marry you. And so he's like, okay. So of course, as soon as Lorraine and Aria see her holding his hand and with him, you know, and she's married to him, of course they're pissed off. And I was like, ha, yeah. I was like, you know, ha ha, you know, sucks to be you. So yeah, I really could not stand them. They were such bitches. Such bitches. So they end up getting married. I said, I really enjoyed this novella. I love the fact that both of the characters were virgins, though I am saddened by the fact that their parents didn't tell them enough about sex and intimacy. They did not. I felt so sorry, so bad for them, because they really just didn't know the ins and outs of it. It's like, teach your children sex. Teach them what it's all about and like how your body works and functions and all of that stuff. I mean, God, there's Sex for Dummies books, man. It's like, teach your children this stuff, you know? And I said to where they had to learn it by experimenting, and it wasn't an enjoyable experience for Teresa at the beginning. But I did love how Mason felt so bad when he found out that Teresa wasn't enjoying herself. You could see that he very much wanted to please her and praise her when she found her pleasure. He honestly was such a sweetheart and very eager to learn what pleased her. And like oh man, it was so sweet. Once he found out like that she was kind of like faking it, you know, like her pleasure and stuff, he felt so bad. I was like, oh, bless him. You know, like, he was such a sweetie. He just wanted her to, like, find pleasure too, you know? And it was so sweet. He was such a sweetheart. I was like, oh, I want to hug him. I wanted to hug both of them. I was like, they were just such sweet characters. I felt so bad for them, you know, and I'm like, oh my God, I would tell them about it. You know, like, you don't know about sex. I don't, girl, I'll teach you. I'll teach you. I'll tell you what about it. You know, there's no reason not to teach your children about that. It's not a dirty thing. It's not dirty. It's not bad. It's not just for reproduction. This is the whole point of, like, we find pleasure in it. If it was just for reproduction, we wouldn't find pleasure in it. You know, so obviously, you know, we can enjoy ourselves too, you know, and we're not animals to where we just reproduce. We can find ways of, you know, not reproducing. So I just, oh, he was such a sweet character. I was like, oh, he's so cute, you know. I said both these characters suffered from self-confidence issues and not knowing much about love and affection. So when they didn't communicate what they liked or didn't like in the bedroom, their miscommunication caused some heartache for both of them. Like, he was like, honestly, there was a part in it, he was like tearing up of telling her, like, don't leave me. And I was like, oh, I was like, it was so sweet. So sweet. I was like, oh, he just wants her to be with him. And it was, oh, it was so cute. It was so cute. It was adorable. I loved the novella. It was such a sweet story. Definitely, like, a favorite of mine. Like, I have certain favorites of Claire Kent's that I just absolutely love, that are part of, like, the Kindle series. Like, Homestead I really enjoyed, and I really love Hero, a part of the Kindle series. But this one here was so sweet because they just wanted to, like, please each other and just and have that companionship and partnership, you know. And she very much, like, I loved how she was like, I don't want to just be in the house. She's like, I want to help you with the outside too, like help you milk the cows and all that stuff. She very much wanted to help. She's like, look, I'm gonna get that stuff done in no time. She goes, I'm gonna help you. And so she wanted to go out every morning and help him, you know. And I was just like, oh, I loved it. It was good. I really loved it. I said I really wanted to jump into the book and talk to them like a mom and reassure them that it's okay to feel what they feel. I felt a lot of empathy for both of their characters. They both deserved happiness. They were just so sweet and innocent. And I'm just like, I felt so bad for them. They're not knowing how to communicate with each other and them learning it as they go, and then finally opening up and like explaining, you know, what they're feeling. And it's like, yes, communicate with each other, you know, talk about how you're feeling, you know, and then like the other one can communicate back, and then you can kind of like stop this miscommunication and all that stuff. So yeah, it was, I really like that one. Yeah, this one here, there was also this scene in here, and I really liked it. I thought it was a cute scene too. There was a scene in here that I enjoyed where Teresa was talking and laughing with another guy who lived in the town, and Mason comes over and acts jealous. And I could see that this is the first time he's ever felt that type of emotion for a woman, how he feared that Teresa liked this other man more than him. So I can understand that Mason needed reassurance from Teresa, but also he needed to be able to build up his confidence, as I normally am not a huge fan of jealousy, but in this instance I could tell that Mason didn't realize that what that emotion was, and it wasn't deliberate on his part. He wasn't intentionally being an asshole, and he apologized for how he acted, so it made me empathize with him a lot. I wanted to give both of them a hug. I think it was that scene where after he kind of got jealous and they went home and he kind of like broke down of like, don't leave me, and I was like, oh, you know, like I said, it was so sweet. It was like very quick. I got through this book in like a day. It was such a sweet story. Anyways, enough of my gushing about that one. So the next one I ended up reading is Before We Came. This is by Sloane St. James. And this is the Lakes Hockey Book 1. I really liked the story. This was such an interesting story. So we got Lonan and Bridget. She goes by Birdie. So the trope is one night stand, hockey, brother's best friend, dominant, submissive play. The content warning is talk of child abduction, gaslighting, narcissistic parental figure, emotional trauma, child death, talk of murder, and there's also self-deletion in here. So Birdie just recently lost her adoptive mother, Julianne. So she plans her funeral, ends up finding out secrets Julianne wanted to keep secret, obviously, including her adoptive mother's journals, and finds out that her biological parents didn't give her up like Juliana made her believe. Birdie was actually abducted by Julianne years ago. She was barely 7 when she was kidnapped at Niagara Falls and transported to Canada. Her family never gave up hope that she was still alive. Birdie decides to go to the USA to find her family, and one night she meets up with this hot guy at a bar and decides to hook up with him as a one-night stand. They had a lot of incredible sexual energy. Once Birdie finds her parents, she introduces herself to her mother, and as soon as her mother sees her, she knows it's her daughter. Oh man, I cried during that scene because you could see how much like hesitation that Birdie had, where she's like, oh, what if she doesn't want me? What if she doesn't recognize me? She's going to be heartbroken because she's like, I really want my parents back. And Julianne, that biatch, had convinced that girl that her parents didn't love her anymore. She was unwanted, and no, if it wasn't for her taking her in, she would be nowhere. And horrible woman, gaslit this poor girl for years and made her believe that she was unwanted and unloved by her family. And the woman, he didn't even treat her right. She didn't even treat her right. She treated her like garbage. So Lonan is a friend of the family, and he has been best friends with Birdie's brother for years. When he was younger, he was taken in by Birdie's parents due to Lonan's mother being an alcoholic. He sees Birdie at the bar around the same time. He feels like him hooking up with puck bunnies is boring. He was getting bored with it, and he feels like, man, I want to find a woman to like love and like get married and have children with. Like, he really wanted to be a dad and stuff. So he's ready to settle down with someone and have children. But once he sees Birdie and her gray eyes, something triggers in him, and he wants to be with her for the night. They have sex, and it's incredible. His best friend calls him and tells him that they found Birdie. And so he races there and discovers that Gray, that's what he called the woman that's the one-night stand, is Birdie, his boyhood crush and first kiss. This is why he had like this, he's like, oh, there's something about her. It's because he had a crush on her when he was younger. And so he was obviously, those feelings were still there, but he couldn't like put his finger on why he had this connection to this woman. From there, all he basically wanted was like her forever. He's like, oh, she's it for me. This is the woman I want forever. So I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't a typical hockey romance. It had some deeper layers to it that really made the book interesting. I said, you have Birdie, her real name is Bridget, who for years went by Elizabeth. It's Julianne's other daughter. She grew up with some memories of her former life, feeling unloved, unwanted, and abandoned by her biological parents. Her adoptive mother was a very uncaring woman who only used Birdie as a prop for her vanity. And I hate to say narcissistic personality. I said that word gets used too much nowadays for people who have narcissistic tendencies. I think there's a difference between the two. There's narcissistic tendencies, which a lot of people have. Narcissistic tendencies. It doesn't mean you're a narcissist. You have to have an actual diagnosis of like narcissistic personality disorder. And so you have to have a diagnosis of that, you know? And even when you do get a diagnosis of that, narcissists truly do not believe there's anything wrong with them. They think everyone else is at fault, you know? I said I would describe Julianne having grandiose narcissistic personality disorder just based on the research I've done on the disorder. So I'm not a specialist in that field. Plus also I can't diagnose her because I'm not a doctor. I said Julianne liked to spend a lot of money and put herself into debt, which caused conflict for Birdie. You could see that Birdie resented her adoptive mother. She didn't have any deep familial feelings for her. So when she passed away, Birdie felt a sense of relief. I said her only family she had was her best friend, Mickey. The real name of Mickey is Freya. And so I said, I felt for Birdie because she just wanted to feel wanted and loved. So when she finally finds her parents due to DNA testing websites, She finally has a family who is there for her, but she also doesn't want to be a burden to her family either because her story is considered newsworthy. Also because it's been so many years of her being gone. Obviously, Julianne was having her use Elizabeth's birth certificate and social insurance number. That's what they call it in Canada. They call it a social insurance number, where here in the US, we call it a social security number. So Birdie is considered legally dead by the U.S. Social Security Administration, so she can't work or get any medical insurance in the USA because she doesn't have an identity. She wants to be self-sufficient and do things on her own. So I could understand her frustration and anger towards Julianne and her losing so many years without a real family. I said I also enjoyed how the author put guilt from Birdie, where she felt guilty that she never questioned Julianne more about her biological family, and she feels like maybe she could have been discovered earlier, but honestly she was a child and she isn't to blame for what happened to her. I also like that Birdie started going to therapy because she needed those assurances that she did what was right. I said she listened to her fight or flight response. Even the detective on the case told her she did the right thing, because there's a chance where if she questioned it too much, Julianne may have like ended her, you know, because throughout the book you're like, okay, did Julianne like end her child? Did she like delete her child, you know, at Niagara Falls? Because if you fall in Niagara Falls, you ain't surviving. There's only been like one case in the history of Niagara Falls where a woman was like in a barrel with her, I think her cat. She survived it, but everyone else who attempted it died. You do not want to attempt to jump in the Niagara Falls and think you're going to survive that. You're going to turn into freaking cheeseburger. You know, you're going to turn in ground hamburger. Don't attempt that. So I cared more about her family dynamics more in this story than the romance between Lonan and Birdie. Though I thought it was good too. It was pretty typical for a romance. I said there was some dominant submissive play in here, but not overly so where it took up much of the other plot point in the story. I said, and of course there was some other things in this book I could discuss further, but I don't want to give too much away. Like I said, there's more of the plot point in here that I didn't want to give too much away of, like, the diabolical nature of Julianne. Like, you end up reading more of her diary entries, and she was a psycho. That woman was a psycho. So you'd have to read more of that in there. But I didn't want to give away the whole plot point of the book. But it was really good. I really loved the storyline. It was such an interesting storyline because you don't normally get that from romance novels. Like, a lot of times it's pretty typical, you know, same kind of tropes and stuff. So this was interesting, you know. I said also this was my first book by Sloane St. James, and I'm really impressed with her writing. So I ended up delving into the second book in this series. So this was Strong and Wild. So this is Lakes Hockey. So this one here, we got Reese Kucera and Freya. Of course, she goes by Mickey. Her name is McCoy, so that's her nickname. Is Mickey. So it's Dislike to Love Hockey, and also there's Dominant and Submissive. All of these books very much have it to where there's definitely more like a BDSM or maybe more rougher sex type of thing. It's not like vanilla type of sexual relations. There's definitely more kinky stuff going on, you know? Definitely more kink. So the content warning is there's degradation kink in here, edging. Edging's like, if anybody doesn't know what edging is like prolonging, my daughter's phone. Edging's like prolonging orgasm, things like that. That's what edging is. Talk of drug overdose. There's a drug addicted sibling in here. Also, there's like slut shaming in here too. So Freya Mickey McCoy is originally from Seattle, and she went to college in Canada where she met her best friend Birdie from the first book. And Birdie's husband helped Mickey find an apartment usually reserved for the rookie hockey players on his team that is above a bar. And Mickey gets a job below her apartment at the bar. And as a side job, since the bar doesn't pay enough, she has an account on this platform called Followers. I'd say it's probably similar to OnlyFans, where she makes content showing herself naked while making baked cookies or baked goods and all that stuff. She wears like an apron and everything else is like she's naked, but she pretty much like talks to the people who are, you know, like give her money and stuff like that, and who are part of her followers. She talks to them through like the live stream, and she does like private chats too with different people. So Mickey is saving up money to open up her own bar / bakery, and she calls herself the Queen of Tarts on a platform, and no one sees her face. So they only really see like her hair. They know she's like a redhead. But I really love the idea for this bar / bakery. I can't remember the name of it. Something Spice. I can't remember. Something in Spice. Or something in Ice or something like that. I can't remember the name. But I like the idea of it. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting idea. It's like, yeah, you know, you usually get like if somebody's getting drunk, they want to usually snack on something. So yeah, baked goods, why not, you know? Heck, since like she's going to have a liquor license, you could always put liquor in some of the baked goods too, you know, since it's like you obviously have to be like 21 and older in order to get into the bakery, you know, / bar. And she said it was, she wanted to be more of like a speakeasy where you had to have, you had to say like a password in order to get in and all that stuff. Everyone had to know the password. I thought that was kind of cool. I'm like, that's such an interesting idea, you know, for like a bar / bakery. And so she really liked to bake. And so I was like, oh, that's a kind of interesting idea. She's like, she had a really cool idea. And I'm like, oh, what a smart girl, you know? So Reese Kusera is the rookie on his hockey team. He is originally from Maine, and he brought his younger sister along since she's the only family he has left since their parents died in a car accident. Reese is trying not to get into a romantic or hookup relationship, so in order to let off some sexual tension, he ends up joining the followers platform and calls himself Hat-Trick Swayze. Now, of course, that reminds me of Patrick Swayze, and it reminded me of a movie that came out in the 80s. I actually have it on DVD. This one's called Youngblood. Now, of course, it's got Rob Lowe in it. Patrick Swayze is a hockey player in here too. And what's her name again? Cynthia Gibb. And also, you don't see it on the back, but also a young Keanu Reeves, you know? So this one here is a cute movie. It does have some sexual stuff in it. I'll just say that. Rob Lowe back in his day was a hot guy. So yeah, he definitely had some holy shit moments in here, you know, like him. That in like, what was it, that one, I think it was called About Last Light, like him and Demi Moore were in that movie too. Yeah, that was hot too. But this one here is good. I like it. And yeah, it's funny to see like a young, of course, all of them were young in here, like a young Rob Lowe, young Patrick Swayze, but also a young Keanu Reeves. Yeah, so it's a cute movie, like if you've never seen it. So I bought it on, at Amazon, and it was like, I think it was like $10 or something like that on Blu-ray. I just recently bought it. Because I'm like, yeah, I don't have that movie. I need to get that on DVD. So yeah, I got that one recently, and it's a cute movie. But what his name, Hat-Trick Swayze, I'm like, oh my god, it's like Patrick Swayze, and I'm like, oh my god, Youngblood. He was a hockey player in there, and I'm like, so like it just, my movie references go off in my head. So he ends up being the Queen of Tarts' first follower, and they have private conversations on there besides him chatting with her on her live streams. So what they don't know is the fact that they live right next door to each other. And I was like, that's a little convenient that they live right next door to each other on top of the bar. One night, Mickey leaves her new neighbor some macarons by his doorstep, and she sees him through the peephole, open them up, and then spit them out. That insults her, and he also ends up being rude to her when he sees her, so she ends up hating him at first, because he ends up discovering really fast that the Queen of Tarts is his neighbor, who he's been dancing with himself for how many times, you know? And so he's like, as soon as he picks it up, he opens it up and sees that they're macarons after she just was talking about him on the live stream. And he goes and he puts it in his mouth, and he's like, holy shit, the Queen of Tarts lives right next to me. So he had spit it out. And so, of course, she saw it, and she got insulted. And she was like, how dare he not like my macarons, you know? After she spent, like, so much time with, like, trying to perfect them, you know? Because I don't think it's an easy thing to do. So I said, I did enjoy this romance. I said, this is a book that has some underlying layers besides the relationship. I said, you end up finding out that Mickey used to date a man who ended up becoming addicted to drugs, and those drugs ended his life. The drug that I think he used to do was like cocaine, and he ended up doing it and ended up being mixed with fentanyl. That will fuck you up. Fentanyl is so bad. So he ended up ODing in the bathroom, and she found him. And of course, you know, she was devastated because she loved him, even though, you know, addiction, when you know somebody, you're either dating somebody or you have family members that have an addiction, it is so hard to be around them because you're slowly watching them self-delete. That's essentially what it is. You're slowly watching them off themselves because they just get worse and worse. And then there's going to, you know, one day there's going to come a point where you're going to get that call that they died, that they overdosed. And so it's such a hard thing for families to deal with. So I totally understood her reasoning, because my ex, if anybody doesn't know, my ex was an alcoholic. He drank all the time, and he had this Jekyll Hyde personality where some days he'd be a happy drunk and he's chatting my ear off. Other days he would be a mean drunk and he would degrade me and say nasty things to me and, you know, really put me down and stuff like that. And he had a lot of like internal demons. And I think a lot of addiction is that. Either it's like there's like a mental illness, and, you know, you end up getting addicted because you have these underlying mental illnesses going on, or you have a lot of demons that you need to address with a therapist and you're not addressing them. So you end up using alcohol or drugs to cope with it, you know, or some people may have been sexually abused when they're children and they turn to drugs as like a coping mechanism. One of those things, right? So, but it's a hard thing to see this person, and you want them to you know, get on the wagon to overcome that addiction. And I know it's like an everyday struggle. I realize that. I heard enough stories from people who are addicts or former addicts, you know, it's an everyday struggle. I totally get that. You know, this is why they say, like, when you're in AA or NA, it's one day at a time. I totally get that. But I also can empathize with the family members who have to deal with that. They have to deal with that family member. And so when it came to Freya, when it came to her, she very much was like, when she started dating Reese, she told him, you need to get your sister help. You know, you either you get her into a rehab or you've got to set boundaries, because she's going to continue to walk all over you. And I totally understood that. You know, like, addicts are very much selfish people. They only care about themselves, their next fix. They don't care about anything else. They just care about getting that high. And so if they can steal from you, they will do it. And so he basically had to like put his foot down with her, and it kind of caused conflict with him and Freya. And then there were people, like, someone was like, oh, I didn't like what he did. And I'm like, I understood. He like lashed out at Freya, and I understood his reasoning, because it's like, you know, you love your family member, you love them, you want the best for them. And so, you know, if you set up those boundaries, you're afraid, you're terrified you're going to lose them. You're going to absolutely lose them. So it's a hard thing for your family members to have to put up those boundaries and say, no, I can't be around you until you get clean. That is the hardest thing I think family members have to deal with. You know, and of course, you know, the addict's going to be like, you don't love me, you don't care about me, blah, 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 and all this other stuff. They're going to throw every excuse at you. They're going to throw everything at you, because they deep down don't want to admit that they have a problem. Like I said, in AA, it's like the first step of AA is admitting that you have a problem. You have to admit that I have an issue with a dependency on alcohol or drugs, you know? And so he had to like, that was heartbreaking to read, you know? But I totally was with Freya on it, where I was like, girl, yes, you have to set up boundaries. And she knew that you had to go and do this stuff. Like, you know, she had like Narcan and different things like that in her apartment, you know, so she was like prepared for that stuff. And his sister like ended up coming over, and she was like going through like withdrawal, you know, and so she had to like, she was helping his sister. And the, you know, like, I guess like with withdrawal, you could start throwing up a lot, you can get like diarrhea, things like that. So she was like giving her a shower and different things like that, helping her that way. But she also didn't want to trust her in her apartment, because she's like, she could steal from me, which the sister ended up doing. The sister ended up stealing money from Freya. And so that's a, you know, that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to deal with. So I'm like, I understood where Freya was coming from, but I also understood where Rhys was coming from too, where he's like, he's afraid he's going to lose his sister. That's the only family he has left. His parents, they ended up dying in like a car accident. So she was like the only family he had left, you know? So I understood where he was coming from as well. And so like I said, if you don't know addiction, you're not going to know what these people are going through. Like, you know, and I have several family members that are either addicts or former addicts. And so, you see like how their personality is like so different. Like, I grew up for years where my one uncle, he was addicted to drugs. Like, I think he started off with like weed, and then he went to like, I think speed, and did all kinds of stuff. And I think he did like heroin, things like that. So he ended up like going to jail for drugs. And his girlfriend at the time, like, her father was a lawyer, and he got it easy. He could have probably went to jail for like longer. So after he went to jail, he had went into one of those like houses for like the rehab and stuff like that. It wasn't like necessarily rehab, but it was like I don't want to say like halfway house, but it's like one of those like clean and sober places. So you have to stay sober. And so he got himself clean, which good for him. But he was like a completely different person. Like, this is not the person that I knew growing up. He was like so different. Like, when I knew him growing up, which I didn't see him that often because, you know, they lived here in California and I lived in the East Coast. He was so quiet. He was like quiet. He'd barely talk. He'd come from the garage and come into the house and fucking do like this huge sandwich and all that stuff. He'd be there for like in the garage for days, getting high and stuff like that. So yeah, my grandmother, I love my grandma, but she enabled him. She enabled his behavior, and he was a drug addict for like how many years? And I'd say like him going to jail saved him. That honestly saved him. And he got clean, and he's been clean and sober for years. You know, he now works for like, you know, he works for the city now, and I'm like, damn, dude, good for you. You work for the city, gets paid good money. You know, and he's doing well for himself. So I'm like, good for him. You know, he's staying sober. But there's a lot of his friends, like, he lost that OD'd, you know. Some of them are obviously still addicts too, you know. It's a hard thing to witness. Hard thing to witness. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. It was, you know, it was obviously difficult because it's talking about like drug addiction and all that stuff, but it still was a good one. And I said, I loved how strong-willed Freya was in the particular scene in that book. Also, the relationship had more of the dominant, submissive nature to it, because that was his way of controlling things in his life, obviously, was to have that control in the bedroom. And so she had to like give up some control in order to like have that, you know, submissive nature. It was good though. I gave it 4 stars. I did enjoy it. Unfortunately, for the third book, I didn't like this one. I did not like this one. I ended up DNFing it. So it's called In the Game. And this one here has it to where the characters are Barrett and Raleigh. So we got Secret Child, Hockey, former Puck Bunny. It was the Secret Child that did me in. I hate Secret Child with a fucking passion. And I'm like, to me, you better have a damn good excuse of why there was a Secret Child. Why did you not tell the father until how many years later, right? So the author tried to come up with this excuse of why he didn't know. But to me, I was like, when it came to her, the mom, I was like, girl, there's more you could have did. So I said, okay, so right off the bat, I'm not a huge fan of the secret baby / child trope, because it's so hard to justify why the heroine wouldn't let the hero know that he is a father. I said, in here, after they have a one-night stand, which, if I'm being honest, I thought the sex scene was mediocre compared to the author's other books in this series. I just thought it was very mediocre. I was like, So after they have sex, 6 weeks later, Riley finds out that she's pregnant. So she decides to DM Barrett through Instagram to tell him that he is a dad, because he is mean to her on there, she decides to not pursue any type of child support or any paternity tests. Yep. Which I think is absolutely fucking stupid. I said, for the fact that even if the man didn't want anything to do with his child, you should at least do the decent thing as the kid's mother and get child support from the baby daddy to help with the raising of the child. He helped with creating of that child. He needs to fucking pay. I said, this guy's a professional NHL player. There's no way the NHL would allow their player to not pay his baby mama child support. They will hound his ass and say, no, you better pay. And believe me, he's an NHL player and he gets paid how much money? There's no way she would have, anything would have been missing from that child's life. That kid would have definitely got a good amount of child support every month. NHL player, professional, come on. Why do you think there's puck bunnies out there? I said, now what really ended up happening was Barrett's social media manager had a huge crush on him and obviously wanted him for herself. So Barrett had said that he doesn't deal with his social media, so he had her deal with it. So I automatically knew that his social media manager had something to do with the nasty messages, because the see you next Tuesday wrote them herself, and why he had no idea that he even had a son. This is why 5 years goes by. So 5 years later, Riley and her company are working with Mickey, the heroine from the second book. And Barrett shows up and sees Riley. She runs away like a coward, and Barrett tracks her down. He ends up seeing her with her son, Arthur. And when he looks at that boy and finds out his age, he figures out quickly that Arthur is his son. And he's pissed at her for not telling him. Understandable. So he continues to pursue her and get to know his son, and how many times I got annoyed with her trying to dictate how Barrett will see their son. And I'm like, honey, you didn't do your due diligence of making sure this man had paid child support. It was your fault. 5 years went by that he never got a chance with his son. Don't tell me, oh, I tried. You could have went to the child support agency. They could have went and did a paternity test. So he continues to pursue her and get to know his son. And how many times I got annoyed with her trying to dictate how Barrett will see their son. I said, I really liked the kid. He was adorable. I loved seeing Barrett with Arthur. He missed out on so much with his son. He also got the DMs and saw that the account that messaged Riley wasn't his. I said, so obviously the ex-social media manager assumed his identity online, and she blocked all of Riley's social media from Barrett's accounts. So he was talking with his lawyer about suing the social media manager, which I don't blame him. I'm like, yeah, sue that bitch, I said, also, right at the beginning, I didn't like their hookup because it was more insta-love, and I absolutely hate that trope. I said, I didn't feel enough of a connection for Barrett to continue to obsess over Riley for 5 freaking years. He was such a sweetheart, and I felt like he deserved better. I don't understand these romance authors lately where they give us these great male characters, but the female characters are extremely lacking. I said, I'm not asking for perfect characters. I just want these women to have more common sense and to self-reflect and work on themselves. I said, such a disappointing read because I really loved her first and second book in the series. And it was. And I said, I got to about 40% of the book and I just skimmed the rest of it. I said, love the scenes where Barrett was hanging around Arthur. And then when Barrett finally told Arthur that he was his father, Arthur was so happy and said he figured it out. I said, I didn't care about the romance between Barrett and Rowley. I love the scenes between Barrett and his son. It was so sweet. He was like, I'm a dad. And I was like, oh, it was so cute. I really love those scenes. And I just was like, I don't care if they get together. I really don't. I'm like, I don't care if they do. Because it's like, girl, you could have went to child support. You could have went and did timeshare. God damn it. I hate when authors do this. I hate when authors do this because it's such a huge plot hole. It's such a huge plot hole. I've dealt with the child support agency. I've dealt with this. The only way a man is getting out of not paying is if he works under the table and he's not showing his W-2s, he's not doing W-2s, or he's not holding a job. But this guy's a professional NHL player. You're definitely getting money from this guy, Come on. Yeah, that one pissed me off. That one pissed me off and I could not finish it. So I was like, you know what? Let me get off into the last book in the series. I love this one. So this one's Stand and Defend. I just recently got done with this one. So I gave this one 5 stars. So we got Camden. He goes by Banksy. They call him Banks because his family comes from money. So he's Camden, Banksy Teller, and Jordana Landry. So the tropes is hockey, ex-best friend, friends with benefits, who hurt you, playboy, forced proximity, and he also has a pierced wang. He has, what's it called, like a ladder where he's got multiple piercings on his ding-a-ling, and I'm like, how does that feel? I'm like, I'm curious, I'm curious, how that feels. I'm like, I'd be too afraid, like, it's gonna hurt, like, I'm not sure about that. Like, I don't think I'd want that in my hoo-ha, So the content warning is there's abusive relationship, gaslighting, fat phobia, stalking, verbal abuse, domestic violence, and cheating. So Camden heads off to his best friend's engagement party, Brian, and meets Jordana. She prefers the name Jordan. She doesn't like going by her full name. So Brian's fiance, and Cam is instantly attracted to her. While there, he discovers that their relationship isn't great. He overhears Brian belittle and verbally abuse Jordan. So he felt so uncomfortable that he interrupts Brian scolding Jordan. A day or two after that, Camden goes to his room with a female he met at the party and discovers Brian balls deep having sex with Jordan's supposed best friend, Veronica. I think her name was Veronica. Yeah. He's like having sex with her up against like a wall, And so Brian tells him to not tell Jordan, but since Camden isn't a dickwad, he finds her at the club and tells her the truth. And I was like, good for you, Camden. Yeah, boy. I hate that, like, bros before hoes. Nah, fuck that, If the dude's cheating, tell the chick. So Jordan leaves the city and goes back to stay with her parents. Of course, Brian and her best friend try to contact her, but she ignores them. Shortly after that, Camden runs into Jordan at his favorite coffee shop. He helps her get her too tight engagement ring off her finger and then proceeds to give her his number. When Jordan goes to Brian's place to get her stuff, he threatens her and forces the ring back on her finger. And basically shoves her up against the wall and hits her head on the wall like a few times and kind of like dazes her. And he's telling her like, no, you're going to marry me. And I was like, you fucker. I was like, I wanted to jump through the book and punch this guy in the nutsack, So, where am I at? So, when Camden sees Brian again with Jordan, he can tell that she's not in a good place, but he pretends that everything is okay in front of Brian. One day, Jordan goes to their apartment to get her stuff, and he follows her there and tries to attack her. He had a tracker on her phone. He was tracking everywhere she went. But she manages to get away with the help of a security guard. Good thing the security guard, honestly. She's too scared to go back to her parents. And so she gets in contact with Camden, and he tells her to go to his house. His house has like security and like a gate, a secure gate. So while she's staying with Camden, her ex proceeds to threaten her through text messages, gets her fired from his parents' company, freezes her accounts, so they had a joint account, and her credit cards, and reports the car stolen. It was on his name. Did all of that to her to try to get her to come back to him. What a fucker. He was a bastard. So luckily, due to her quick wit, she convinces the police officer not to arrest her because she ended up getting pulled over. She then had to take buses back to Camden's place and then walk in heels 5 freaking miles. So when she finally makes it back, her feet are all torn up. She vows then and there that she isn't going to be a victim and she's going to get revenge on Brian. I was like, good for you, girl. Get him. Get him. I was like, get him. I said, I was cheering. I was like, you got this, girl. I said, while reading this part, I said, while she stays with Cam, her and him get closer and start a friends with benefits like situationship that turns to Cam wanting her for himself. Like he starts falling for her hard, you know. He was so sweet. I loved his character. I said, the ultimate playboy caught feelings. I said, Brian continues to stalk and harass Jordan and even finds out that Jordan is staying with Cam. He sits outside the gate to spy on her in his car. Cam one day sees Brian outside his security gate trying to mess with the keypad. So Cam decides to invite him in, and he proceeds to taunt Brian and say to her, like, oh, she's like a good lay and all that stuff. And ooh, Brian is so pissed. And so he goes and swings at Camden, and Cam's like, oh, you want to play? Okay. Gets him down on the ground and starts pummeling the shit out of Brian. I was like, good for you, man. I was like, yes. So I was laughing at that scene. It was good. He knocked a tooth out of his mouth too. And I was like, because Camden is like one of those like enforcers, like in hockey and stuff. Now he's a captain, so he has to control it. But before he was enforcer, so he was like, you know, he'd shove people against the boards and everything, you know. So he's used to fighting. I said they continue to be in a situationship until they finally confess their feelings and start dating. It was so sweet. I love this one. As I really enjoyed this book, especially because Jordan started out as this woman who couldn't think for herself while she was engaged to that douchebag Brian. But once she finally leaves him and starts to hang out with Camden, he really brings out her confidence and allowing her to fulfill her like sexual fantasies she's always wanted to try. I also loved Camden. He was so funny and he would constantly mess with her and their banter was hilarious. I said also the sweet things he did for her was so sweet. I said he was a big softie, though he didn't want to admit it. He's probably like one of my favorite characters in the series. He's definitely one of my favorites. He's one of the standouts for me in the series. Like him, he was my favorite, definitely. Like he was so funny. He was like a jokester and like would constantly like, fuck with everybody on the hockey team and stuff like that with jokes and everything. And yeah, he was funny. He had a great sense of humor. But he also was like so sweet to her and the reason why is because his mother, when him and his, I believe siblings were little, their mother was married to the father and the father would beat her and would abuse her. And she finally had gotten away from the relationship, and I believe she divorced the husband. I don't know if she was married to him, but I know she got away from him. And then she ended up marrying this other guy and this other man, and he was a sweetheart to her and was willing to raise her and her children. And he had a son from a previous relationship. And so they were just this really happy family. And so he grew up with that, but he remembers what it was like with his mother, you know, of being scared and her, you know, her abuse and everything. So he started like these charities for like, you know, battered shelters and different things like that for women and children and all that stuff. And I thought it was very sweet that he was doing that, like donating his time and volunteering his time and donating money and everything like that to it. And I thought that was really nice. And so this is why he was like, he had this like soft spot for her, and he was like, he didn't want to see her continue to be in this relationship with Brian if he's like, it's not a good relationship, you know. He's like, he's being verbally abusive to you. And then she ends up like, he ends up like reading the stuff between Brian and her, because Brian continues to like threaten her and stuff. And so he ends up like listening to the message that Brian was saying to her, and he got heated, pissed, because he finds out that he was roughing her up too. He was like being like really abusive and like grabbing her arms and stuff like that. And then what he did with her on the wall and stuff like that, he was pissed. He was seeing red. He was ready to kill Brian, you know? And so, there was like a few scenes I loved in this one. Like there was a scene where she's watching the game, watching his hockey game, and he ends up like at the end of the game, like, you know, hockey players, they kind of like, they go out. There's this area where you kind of like walk through to kind of lead to the lockers. So he ends up like banging on the glass and ends up climbing up on it. He's kind of hanging there on his armpits, and he's telling her like, come here, you know. And so she goes to him, and he like picks her up and like kisses her. And I was like, oh my God, that's so sweet. I love that part. It was so sweet. And then like toward like the end, he like takes her out to the ice and doesn't ask her to marry him, but people assume it because he goes and he pulls out a ring pop, and it was so cute, and he puts it on her pinky finger, and he's like basically saying like, I want to date you, I love you, I want us to like, you know, be more than like friends with benefits. And it was such a sweet, like, I loved him. He was so sweet. And everybody like assumed that they were, you know, engaged and everything like that. And so all of his like friends were like, I knew it, you know, he's down for the count, not a playboy anymore. So all of his friends, you know, on the team were like, you know, good for you kind of thing. It was sweet. I really liked it. They kind of like both were like hesitant to kind of start a relationship and everything like that, even though they were like gone for each other, absolutely gone for each other. And they also were doing like, you know, obviously in the bedroom and all that stuff, because he had like, you know, his piercings and everything. And even like there was a certain point where they both got like tattoos. Like he got like this sunshine on his like heart area where his chest was, or where his heart is situated. And because he always called her his sunshine. It was so sweet. And then she ended up getting like this moon and all that stuff to kind of like match with the sun and the moon. And she ended up getting her nipples pierced, you know, because she wanted to like, you know, spice it up and everything like that too. And he kind of like opened up a lot of sexual things for her, because she was definitely like sexually repressed with Brian, because Brian only wanted to do it like one way, one position and everything like that. And then, you know, obviously have his pleasure and who cares about her kind of thing, you know, where with Cam, he really was like, hey, show me your pleasure. Show me that you're, you know, that you're getting off on, you know, on me and everything like that. And I'm just like, yep, I appreciated that. He was a giver, you know, he was a giver. So I appreciated that a lot. You know, he really kind of was opening things up for her, you know, with their relationship and stuff. I would say the one thing I thought in here was like, maybe they had too much sex, you know, where I was like, oh, another sex scene. Like toward the end, I was like, oh, another sex scene. Okay. So, but yeah, it was really sweet. I really liked this one a lot. I'd say this one probably was one of my favorites in the series, besides like the first book. I really loved the first book too. I thought that was really good. I really enjoyed the second one too. But I'd say like, you know, obviously the third was like not my favorite, but I liked this series. I thought it was pretty good. And there's another book in a new series that came out that has another guy from this series that he ended up retiring. He was one of the hockey players and he ended up retiring, and now he's in the new series, and it's like a hockey series, and he's like, it's like a dating show that he ends up like being called to go on and stuff. It sounded interesting, so I was going to check that one out. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one a lot. So I'd say like so far I've had a few good books. I've had like, you know, some duds, you know, obviously, but I've had like, you know, at least what, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 books that I really enjoyed, you know, this month so far, you know. So we'll see what happens with the rest of the month and all that stuff, how it goes there, whether or not I have more duds or some other books that I enjoy. But yeah, that's it for this mid-month wrap-up. If you've read something this month that you really enjoyed, let me know down in the comment section how you liked it and all that stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Have yourselves a good day. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to each other. And I'll see you all on the next video. All right. Bye.